Hello YouTubers. In this video we're going to be covering part 3 of chasing an oil leak. This trilogy comes to an end, I believe, and we are now oil free. This video is going to be a bit different in that I can't do any of this work. I don't have the tools to go this deep into this process, so I hired a mechanic. And just like any other shop, probably in America, they probably won't allow you, or this shop would not allow me to go back there and record the work as it was being done so that I could walk you through the process. But they did let me back there at key moments in time for some strategic pictures. So that's all I have to show you about the job. But what I thought I would do is just narrate to you what took place. And so a lot took place. First, let's cover the parts. This part is a genuine GM part. The part number in the description, the part number will be in the description below. As you can see, it came with all of the nuts and bolts and gaskets necessary. This part is the back engine cover, and it came with the rear main seal included. That is the black big O-ring in the middle there. So with the parts in hand, remember, if you remember in part 2, I said I think the leak is coming out the side of the engine, right over the top of the oil pan, and that is the case. That turned out to be the case, but it also was leaking out the rear main seal, which I will show you. So the next thing is, I hired a professional to do this job, and so I took it to them. And once they got their truck up in the air, the first thing they did was disconnect the battery. Then they took down the exhaust, and not the whole exhaust, just from the headers back to the muffler. There's a section there, and here's the picture of that. And so they took that down. The next thing they did was take off the drive shaft, and that's just some bolts at the back of the transmission and in front of the rear end gearing. So they took that down, and then they took out the starter because they're not going to be able to get to the rear main engine cover completely without getting that starter out. So that's why they disconnected the battery. The next thing was, after that came out, the starter came out, they were able to then pull out the bolts and drop the transmission. So that's the part I really couldn't do. I could do the rest of this work, but I don't have an a transmission jack, and I don't have a lift in my garage. So, some jobs are just better suited to the professionals. So the transmission came down, and as you can see, here's the side of the transmission, and I thought I keep my truck pretty clean, but evidently I don't clean everything, and that right there that's got my OCD just a spinning. I can't wait to get the pressure washer on that thing. Anyway, back to the work at hand, and that was after the transmission came down, we were able to then look at what was going on with the back engine cover. And as you can see, the back of the engine, not much to tell, but on the back engine cover it was, and I unfortunately don't have a picture of this, but on the side it was leaking over the starter, which was a good thing that it was leaking there. That's what I thought it was, and that's what it proved to be. But it also showed that I have a rear main seal leak. As you can see, as I zoom in here, it is definitely wet, and that too was part of the problem. So this one part from this one GM part fixes both problems, which is a great thing. The next thing to do after this is to undo the bolts going around the perimeter of the rear main engine cover and pull the panel off. Once we pulled off the back engine cover, once they pulled off the back engine cover, some of that gasket maker unfortunately made its way into the oil pan. So they tried to get they did put a borescope in there, and I wish I would have recorded that process, but they put a camera into the pan and see if they could find the chunk and then probably remove it, but they couldn't. So a little extra work on my part, a little extra money on my part, I had them drop the pan. Didn't need to drop the pan for this job, but when debris goes into the oil pan, it's going to make its way to the oil pickup tube, and I don't need to have further problems. So we dropped the pan, and sure enough, the debris was found. It was unfortunate, but that's what happened. So that's why you see that the oil pan came off the back, at the bottom of the engine as well. So that took place. The next thing was, after they found the debris, cleaned everything up, put everything back, got everything good and sealed up, they put the back of the pan or back of the engine cover back on, put the oil pan back on, and that's what you're seeing here. This is where it's all nice and neat, tidied up, and everything is done. There's not much to the rear main cover. It's just the bolts, and you line it up, and there's not much to it. Oh, one thing I was going to say, when they had the engine cover off, one of the things they checked, and you may want your mechanic to check this, is see if there's any play in the crank. Because a lot of times what leads to rear main seal failures is the crank is bouncing around in the crank journals, in the crank bearings, causing that to move around, and it wears out the rear main seal. Well, they checked that on this truck and said there was no play. It was as tight as day one, from what they could tell, as tight as a new truck, which was great news. That means I shouldn't, according to them, have future problems down the road with this rear main seal. We'll see. You know, the truck has 300,000 miles on it, or very close to it, so yeah, just wears out. So that's what we're attributing this to, not some sort of internal failure that led to a rear main seal failure. So once the engine cover, back of the engine cover went on, and the oil pan went back on, they put back on the starter, and they put back on the drive shaft, put back up the exhaust, and put in new oil. So, you know, the part of this cost, and I'm going to tell you the cost at the end, part of the cost was $160 was just to take the oil pan back down, get a new gasket, and put it back up, and buy new oil. The total cost, you can subtract $160, and that is the cost of doing just the rear main seal and engine cover. So the exhaust went back up, we put in the new oil and reconnected the battery and cranked up the truck, and was just fine, no leaks. They sprayed brake cleaner underneath it, just making sure that, you know, their handprints and fingerprints and any kind of oil that was fallen off, leaked out or something. Everything was nice and clean, and it was. It stayed oil-free. The only thing they had to do was top off the transmission fluid, because when they pulled the transmission down, obviously some of it leaked out the back, and it's just part of it. So a little bit of transmission fluid was a little bit extra, so not too bad. So that was the job complete. The next thing to do was just drive it home and see how it goes. And so here's what you're seeing now is me getting home with the truck and checking it out. What did it do on my way home for the first drive? And it's dry as a bone. I'm super pleasantly surprised that it was dry as a bone. I'm shocked. I shouldn't be shocked. I paid pretty good money to have this job done, but I'm shocked that, you know, it all went very well. I think you can attribute this to a competent mechanic, competent shop that knows what they're doing. People that have done it before, and this shop had done this before plenty of times. So that's the good news. So yeah, right now the truck is leak-free. I have gone back and checked and checked and checked after every time I've driven the truck, and yeah, it's my neighbors are concerned why I get out of the truck and get underneath the truck every time I get home with the truck. So here's the final numbers, and the final number was, including the crankcase position sensor, including the first oil pan gasket, and including the rear main seal, new oil pan gasket, and oil, all of it was right at $900. I think it was a great value, based on what all was done. I was prepared to spend $2,000 on this truck. So obviously I'm quite happy that it was only $900. Goes to show you to shop around, find the right mechanic, find the right shop, one that you trust, and, you know, find a good deal. So all in all, YouTubers, I'm quite happy. And if you like the video, like the video.